And it's about, both of the things that I'm going to read today are about instances where things didn't go quite right, things didn't really go to plan, and how that sort of informs the rest of your life, because sometimes plans on a fishing trip go wrong, and sometimes plans in life go wrong. And it's going to be interpreted in wire and feathers and fur by Tim King. Tim, based on what you know about this story, what did you have in mind for a fly?
Well, to back up a little bit, one of our objectives was to have these guys waxing poetic while I'm fiddling away with my art form, and have me finish the fly as they put the period on their last sentence of the story.
Right.
So we finished together. That's happened exactly once.
I was there.
Wait, didn't it happen in King's English? I think it happened in King's English.
No, it happened at Round Rocks.
It happened at Round Rock.
Okay, so it happened twice.
Yeah.
Great.
Great, we're getting better. Given that, it's not scripted quite as much as maybe Chad will have you believe. But in this case, my interpretation of their reading, like Chad said, this first reading is called Final Plan F. And I was going to interpret that story by tying an ant, because it takes place on a high mountains lake, and where ants are prevalent. And I thought, well, no, an ant would be too small. And then I thought, well, I'll do a big minnow. And I said, no, I want to do a big minnow for the next story. And I said, well, I'll do this, and I'll do that. And all this back and forth will make more sense when he starts to read his story.
Okay.
I like that.
So you're just going to leave it, you're going to let us figure it out as we go.
Well, I'm going to tie an ant, but it's going to be a big ant. It's called, actually the pattern's called a Chernobyl ant. So,
It's called a Chernobyl ant because it's really big, as if this ant grew up around the Chernobyl plant.
Yeah.
It was irradiated
Yeah,
and
not my
grew to
pattern.
enormous size. Okay, so this is final Plan F. The original plan was for 4 of us to backpack into the Wind River Range and fish for 4 days. Me, gosh, a minute just went on. I've been talking too long. The original plan was for 4 of us to backpack into the Wind River Range and fish for 4 days. Me, my son Klaus, my buddy Brad, and Brad's buddy Chris. 4 of us for 4 days. That was the plan. The 4-man fishing trip has a certain elegance. 4 people can furnish good company without stepping on each other's feet. A 4-man team also fits perfectly into one SUV, so you can split the gas money. And if you encounter a bear, odds are decent that it will eat one of your friends instead of you. The 4-man team is simple, it's efficient, but plans fall apart. It's what they do. This one crumbled when another of Brad's buddies asked to join us, and Brad obliged. I don't even remember the guy's name. But because we could no longer fit into one vehicle, we split into 2 teams with each driving separately. This was Plan B. Nobody panicked. 2 teams in separate vehicles actually adds flexibility to a trip like this. For example, it enables part of the group to leave earlier, stay longer. Having 2 vehicles instead of 1 is also more convenient in the event that one of the 2 drivers is devoured by a bear. You might say the backup plan was marginally better than the original, but backup plans fall apart too. Chris needed to move the trip 1 day up because of his work schedule, but I couldn't go any earlier because of mine, so we created Plan C. The 2 teams would drive up consecutively and fish together during the 2-day overlap. It was not ideal, but not terrible as far as backup plans go. But we soon moved on to Plan D when Klaus had to cancel altogether because he'd forgotten he had swim team practice. Plan D survived only briefly before Plan E was hatched so that Brad could leave an additional day early for reasons I've forgotten. According to Plan E, I would leave home on Sunday, hike in on Monday, and meet with Brad's team that afternoon. Unfortunately, I was delayed 1 extra day because of a minor case of engine trouble, but it's pointless to keep track of the backup plans from here because by then, Brad was in the mountains and we couldn't communicate with anything less than satellite phones, and we had no satellite phones. Under the terms of what I will designate Final Plan F, I hiked in a day and a half late with the intention of somehow finding Brad, but Brad's team was meanwhile plagued by a variety of hardships, including heavy rain and a case of violent diarrhea, which caused them to hike out after only 3 days, which meant we missed each other completely. I wasn't heartbroken that the original plan of teamwork and company lay in utter shambles. I love to fish alone. With an entire week off, I could stay as long as my food held out, and I figured I could force it to hold out for a long time. I actually got fairly excited about it. That didn't last. It was still raining a little that first day, but as soon as it cleared up, I grabbed my fly rod and fished a nearby lake, where the exuberance of the resident brook trout was surpassed only by their sheer numbers. With no traveling companions to answer to, I realized I could fish for the rest of the day if I wanted to, and so I did. Back at my campsite, I pulled on a jacket against the evening chill, and then I unpacked my foodstuffs. The lack of dinner time banter was a bit discouraging, but I told myself this could also pass for tranquility. For dinner, I had a custom-made dehydrated casserole of potatoes, bacon, and veggies. I'd used the recipe before, and although the prepackaged ingredients required only the addition of boiling water, I figured I must have committed some grave error in its preparation because the first mouthful was only slightly more appetizing than moistened pocket lint. As I choked it down, I made an important discovery about subsisting in the wilderness. Having company really helps you lie to yourself about how the food tastes. When you're with a buddy, even if the food is crummy, you say, you know, this doesn't really taste too bad. And he agrees, yeah, the crumbled bacon was a great idea. Without companionship, every meal tastes exactly as good as it really is, which of course is usually somewhere in the vicinity, if not very. No campfires were allowed that year, and the short-lived flames of my cook stove made a poor substitute. Without fire or friends, I sat watching the night draw a black hood over my campsite, and I formed misgivings about my ability to pass a week in so lonesome a condition. I'd seen backpackers soloing before. I saw several on the hike in. Soloing never struck me as particularly demanding. I assumed I could do it if I wanted to. But between friends and my sons, the opportunity had never presented itself. In my tent that night, I thought a lot about my two boys and how it would be to fish with them. I thought about how fun it was to fish with Brad. And I never even met Chris, but I thought quite a bit about him too. In the morning, the sun rose over the valley and I started to look on the bright side again. As I warmed up a cup of cocoa, I laid plans for a full day of solitary fishing. I had identified a stream to explore, and with my tenkara rod, I soon discovered that it held equal numbers of cutthroat and brook trout. It was a noisy stream with lots of riffles and rapids. So instead of the hair and feathers flies I prefer, I tied on a gaudy foam-bodied object with rubber legs and a shiny foil wing. Any actual insect would have regarded it as shamefully overdressed, but the cuts and brookies physically or practically took turns at the fly, as though they might be under some sort of truce. Most were small, 12 inches and down. However, as is usually the case in the winds, I was able to hook a few larger fish, one of which was 17 inches or thereabout. But such good fortune is less satisfying when you're alone. A great fish is always greater when there's a witness to it. With every fish I brought to hand, I checked the progress of the sun to ensure enough daylight remained for a few more casts. Hiking around in the dark in the wind rivers isn't exactly death-defying, but it's not to be taken lightly either, especially when you're alone. To our primitive ancestors, night wasn't the respite it is to us. Today's man sees the setting sun as a signal to sit down and turn on the television. To our ancestors, night was just another hazard to cope with, as threatening as any rival or predator. When you are alone at night in a very remote place, you may not be gripped by the same fear that was felt by ancient man, but you'll get a taste of it, and I got mine that evening. As I hiked back to camp, I saw the face and forepaws of some large mammal emerging suddenly from the brush a few yards ahead. I knew instantly that this was a bear, and I was resigned to becoming the subject of news reports and magazine articles recounting my struggle for survival against one of North America's only apex predators that is not afraid of man. I'm still not sure how I avoided wetting my pants, dropping everything and running like a scared cat. However, in the failing light, I eventually identified the creature as a porcupine, a very distant cousin to any animal that could do me harm. Even so, I stood frozen on the trail as it shambled away, murmuring. And so a second day of solo fishing was followed by a second evening of gloomy stillness. And a third day and evening passed in much the same way. There was again no fire and no one to watch fire with. Wow, you're done already? Speed.
I'm listening.
So I turned in shortly after dark. You see how difficult this is? This is like Thelonious Monk's 7th live performance. So I turned in shortly after dark. I'd hardly made a dent in my rations, but I realized that I couldn't last a week no matter how many Cliff Bars I had remaining. Before I'd gotten all the way into my sleeping bag, I decided to abandon Final Plan F in favor of just going home. I lay there for a long time staring at the top vent of my tent where a little starlight leaped in. My least favorite thing about backpacking is breaking down my tent, so in the morning I slept later than intended. Then voices woke me up, people voices. I poked my head out of the tent and squinted. There were 4 of them, coming up single file from the main trail down by the lake in the valley. A guy about my age leading 2 teenagers and an older guy bringing up the rear. They laughed and joked as they approached. Each carried a fishing rod, and although unannounced social calls are generally unheard of in the backcountry, I got it in my head that they were coming to visit me for some reason. So I hastily dressed myself. They weren't coming to visit, of course. There was a footpath that wound past my campsite and went on to a small lake a mile or so up into the hills. But still, I made it out of the tent and was sitting on the ground tying up my boots when they passed by. "Hello," called the guy in the lead. "Nice morning, huh?" I'd been trying so hard to act like I'd only just noticed them, I inadvertently answered, "Good." In my defense, I'll point out that I hadn't spoken much in the previous 72 hours. I'd said hi to a couple hikers on the trail the first day, and I think I said, "Good as it gets," the next day when a college kid asked me how the fishing had been. "I mean, good morning," I stammered. The lead guy chuckled and nodded. "You going up to Blue Lake?" I asked before they got out of earshot. They didn't want to stop and talk, I could see that, but the lead guy slowed down a little. "Yep," he said over his shoulder. "Ever been up there?" "Yeah, sure," I said. "Fishing's great." That stopped them. "How great?" "Yeah, and how far is it?" asked the older guy. I looked up the hill and pursed my lips. "Mile," I said, "but this trail doesn't go all the way up. It's hard to follow once you get to the boulders, and then it's kind of a climb. But the fishing," I held up my hands, "ridiculous." They traded glances, nodding and grinning. "What do you use up there?" "What do you got?" I asked. They hurried over and surrendered their tackle for inspection. Apparently they were visiting after all. The younger guy and his sons were fly anglers. The older guy and the other boy had spin gear. "These spinners will work," I said, pointing. "Jigs will work. Got any streamers?" "Good, definitely use those. Just about any of these big dries will catch something. They climb all over these." "What's up there, browns?" "Brookies." "Is it hard to find?" The older guy was sweating a little already. "Not really, but you might want to go up the ravine instead. It's a longer hike, but you can follow the creek right to the lake." "How much longer?" "Mile and a half, maybe. It's tricky. It's boulders all the way up." "Just go slow," I said. "You'll be fine. If I can make it, you can." They pocketed up their boxes and thanked me. "I'm Dennis," said the lead guy. He introduced the others, Tanner, Jay, the older fellow was Boyd. We shook hands. "So," said Dennis, "you heading up there today? You want to come with us?" "Thanks," I said, "but no, I'm heading home after breakfast." "You by yourself?" he said, looking around for other tents. "Yep," I said. I may have put my hands on my hips and stood a little taller. They nodded, raised their eyebrows. "You don't get nervous up here alone?" asked Boyd. "Nope," I answered a little too quickly. "Well, we'll be up there all day if you change your mind." They thanked me and I watched them file off up the ravine. I set up my stove and laid out some breakfast fixing, pausing now and then to scan the hillside and mark the probable progress of Dennis and his party. They seemed like a nice bunch of fellows. I replayed our conversation in my head, hoping that I hadn't understated the difficulty of the climb or overstated the excellence of the fishing. Sunlight burned away the dew and a mist rose in the glare. All around me the valley lay quiet and smoking like some prehistoric landscape, with only my tent and meager gear to suggest otherwise. Down in the lake in the valley floor, the fish began their morning rise. When I'd finished my cocoa and rinsed my cooking gear, I stood over my tent and considered pulling up the first aluminum stake. I may have even bent down to get started, but I didn't. Instead, I packed my lunch, put on a hat, and grabbed my fly rod. Plans fall through all the time. It's what they do. Thanks. Now what's that?